Israel is talking up the case for splitting Syria apart. At least two senior Israeli spokespeople have clearly stated their belief that dividing Syria is the only possible solution to the current conflict, adding doubts that a recent ceasefire plan for Syria, which has been agreed, would succeed. 17 countries, including the US, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Iran, agreed a temporary ceasefire and called for humanitarian access to besieged Syrian towns. However, reports say Israel has backed the fight against Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, with eyewitness reports of Israeli vehicles transporting injured militants. Meanwhile, Turkey and Saudi Arabia have suggested a ground operation if the US-led coalition wishes it. Saudi Arabia has already based warplanes in Turkey. The Syrian foreign minister has warned against ground operations, a warning echoed by Russia, Iran and Iraq. Why is Israel not concealing its apparent support for ISIL's objectives? Why is Washington silent over Tel Aviv's interference in Syria? And what should the international community say to Israel, Turkey and Saudi Arabia about their potential military activity? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Now, Israeli officials have called for dividing Syria along sectarian lines. Why does Israel support ISIL's objectives in Syria? That's what we asked the American public.
I guess the Israeli government is supporting ISIL in Syria because I suppose they have a common enemy, so it is in their best interest to support someone who's trying to destabilize their enemy.
I am sorry, I'm not familiar with this particular policy.
Well, I guess the whole division aspect, I think it's mainly a kind of a sense of having that mixed population with like the Sunni and the Shia. It might cause for more conflict with them being, in more isolated or in more combined areas than them being separated. So I guess that's why they would be voting for or going for the whole isolation.
Well, probably because maybe financial status. They could do something with their finances. It could be a little bit better for them. It could come out better for them with their government as well. Maybe they have more power. They control more.
Well, I'm certain Israel is very concerned or frightened about their own self-defense. So this is in their interests. I don't blame them for that at all.
If Israel they want to break up the Syrian state, it sounds like, so it would be to their benefit to have it be a little bit divided.
I don't know why they would do that. I think everyone should live peacefully together, not separately along sectarian lines. That doesn't exactly seem very conducive to a good environment in the Middle East.
People do things to benefit themselves, and so that's why any group supports any other group. They feel like it's beneficial for themselves. So that's, in a nutshell, why they would support that.
Oh, that's a good question. I gotta think. They want a little bit more control. So that's the only way they can get control to separate.
Well, so that I think it would be more peace as well. Like even just stopping the fighting altogether would be easier for them, but also just keeping the peace and having it as something weaker for them, so they can just kind of watch over it a bit easier than seeing one whole country fighting.
Can our experts explain Israel's apparent eagerness to divide Syria along sectarian lines, in line with ISIL's own aims?
Well, Israel's been in support of ISIL attacks and operations for quite some time now. That's quite clear, even providing air support for when it surrounds Damascus and when it's tried to attack Damascus, when ISIL has done that. As far as dividing Syria along sectarian lines is concerned, Israel wants to see the whole region divided along sectarian lines, because as long as those countries are fighting themselves, they're not focused on what Israel is doing.
Israel's main concern in Syria is regime change, as they would put it, getting rid of the government in Syria. This comes back to a few reasons. Syria has been to war with Israel repeatedly. Syria, twice, the father of Assad, who was a former president, went to war with Israel, once as Minister of Defense and once as president. And Israel Israel intends to expand. Just as the US, it was not a short project. It took hundreds of years. They expanded and expanded and expanded. They've expanded into Palestine, they're expanding into Lebanon, they're expanding into Syria. So they want to keep growing and growing. And the fact is, Israel's existence as an apartheid is an atrocity in itself. It's an abomination. And the only way that they can keep their neighbours from saying we want to stand up for our brothers who are being killed, who are being massacred, is to keep them fighting each other, killing each other, and make them feel that their biggest enemy is, say, Shias or, say, Sufis or just some different political group or whatever, rather than the enemy that's oppressing all of them, all Muslims.
Israel is widely condemned for supporting ISIL militants who are destroying Syria. Why is Israel no longer hiding its agreement with ISIL's objectives? The public said this.
That I don't know about. ISIL is a very brutal and savage organization. But in the case of emergency self-defense, strange allies can be made. That's the only thing I can think of.
Why would they not hide the fact that they're not supporting? I guess supposed to try and seem like a stronger power in a way. I mean, I don't really know. I don't agree with the objectives of ISIS, but they are a growing power in today's world. I guess that they would like to align themselves in such a way that they would seem as like a growing power internationally, just as ISIS is.
I don't know why they wouldn't be hiding it if it's an uncommon, an uncommon group to support. But if they're supporting it and they're not ashamed that they're doing it, they're just making it public, and I guess they're proving that they're willing to move their objectives forward, even if they have to work with a group that's not all around the best.
They probably just want to come out and say what they're doing. They're not afraid anymore.
They have the dispute over Golan Heights and everything, so if Syria's more divided and it's more messed up, it would be in their best national security interests because they have that rivalry with Syria going on. So that could make sense why they're trying to destabilize the government.
Because they want to stick up for the integrity of their nation, and if ISIL's objectives are succeeding, they are succeeding, I guess.
I have no clue why they're like that, but I think, ISIL is a very dangerous, terrorist unit. So I'd agree would try to get rid of them.
Wouldn't they want to stay out in the firing line altogether? Maybe?
They don't feel that it's to their advantage to hide their agreements. They feel in some way, perhaps, that it is advantageous for them to let their objectives be known.
How?
Well, again, they feel that in some way it would be beneficial to them and against their opposition.
What is the expert view on the reasons behind Israel's open support for ISIL's objectives in Syria?
Well, Israel is, like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, coming out for ISIL now because it's very nervous. This entire project has been put to jeopardy because the Russian offensive has been so effective in coordination with the Iranians and the Syrian army. So Israel, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they're all focused on trying to save this project, which has been to destroy the Syrian regime.
It's not in Israel's interests anymore to call ISIL terrorists. They were trying to play the card that Hamas and ISIS are the same sort of thing, and this didn't sell in most of the world. Now, because ISIL is continuing Israel's policies of basically killing the Arabs, which is fits with what Israel want to do, I think Israel have an almost arrogance now that they can get away with anything. They don't need to prove anything to anyone in the world anymore. They seem, some of the sort of stuff that you hear coming out of Israel, such as Netanyahu trying to blame the Palestinians for the Holocaust, just shows how out of touch he is with world opinion and how stupid he feels that the rest of the world must be to believe anything that comes out of Israel. So I think that's part of the main reason.
Ben-Barak, the Director General of Israel's Intelligence Ministry, says that dividing Syria is the only possible solution. How nervous are you that Israel has such absolutist politicians? We put that to the public.
having individuals in government that are just not willing to see another perspective in general, that's just a negative thing, because there might be another option. There might be another option that's better off than the one that they're thinking of, and people who are so dead set on thinking of one option might not see the possibility or the positivities of maybe a more safer or more agreeable option. So I'm against that. Yeah. Well, I'm not necessarily. I'm worried about that. Yeah.
It could cause war. It could be disruptive for many countries in the Middle East. So they could go into battle. They can, take over other people's armies and enlarge theirs and do what they want.
It makes me a little bit nervous that someone supports such an extremist group as ISIL without any kind of thought for diplomacy.
Well, it's bad because he's kind of supporting the whole army process of the attack on dividing Syria, whereas the whole Syria population wants to keep their country.
The goal should be to try to figure out bringing people together and not creating more separation and tension and dissension. And that's what I think most of us would support.
Kind of nervous, because you would think that America, Israel, they should be aligned and their main goal is to get rid of ISIS, but I guess if they're trying to promote ISIS within Syria, then that's not good. Then it's working against the interests of both of the allies.
How worried should we be about the fundamental commitment of some Israeli politicians to splitting Syria in two? Here's what our expert said.
Well, it is nerve-wracking, because Israel is a nuclear-powered state, nuclear-armed state, and it has a massive military. And also, it views itself without any borders and views these countries that surround it as an internal matter for Israel, because it doesn't have any defined borders. So for Israel, these solutions are an internal matter, and it regards the rest of the world or the territory around it as irrelevant and fair game to meddle in.
This is nothing new. Israel for 70 or so years has been calling for dividing countries, basically dividing Muslims, not just Arabs, but people in Africa as well, non-Muslim countries. A lot of them see Israel as being the fault behind many of their problems and their sectarianism that goes on there. So it's just going back to the whole Israel trying to divide and keep everyone in place, so no one's fighting back against them. Israel is in many ways a dictatorship. It might have elections, but the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, who are under control of the Israeli Authority, do not have a vote in these elections. So it is in many ways a dictatorship, and it's a country run on fear. So Israel can get away with most of what it does by keeping the Israelis in fear, constantly telling them you're in danger, which kind of contradicts their other messages to people across Europe when they're telling Jews you're not safe anywhere but Israel, and then they tell Israelis you're not safe in Israel all the time. So it is part of the tactics, and this is how they can get away with it. But it's very nerve-wracking to know that Israel does feel like it can get away with anything at the moment. The world can't hold it to account.
Reports increasingly demonstrate Israel's support for militants fighting the government of Syria. Why is the US silent on Israel's meddling in that country? Here's the public's view.
I don't think U.S. is silent. I think the U.S. is pulling away from Israel a bit, and that's concerning to me too.
I think the U.S. is kind of walking a fine line for a really long time. We have been seen as kind of a global police force, so we do have to keep in mind that there are other people who can get involved in global politics, and we don't need to be so quick to send off troops to everything. But at the same time, if other countries aren't going to step up and participate, we don't really have much of a choice. I mean, the UN has tried to get involved, but since they don't have a military of their own, you can only make so many decrees before you have to back it up. People aren't listening.
I think the U.S. now doesn't want to get involved with certain things. The U.S. probably did not want to get involved to begin with, but when they decided to get involved, they got stuck. So now they have nothing else to do but to stay quiet.
The United States historically has had a very close alliance with Israel. It's been strained recently with the president occupant of the White House. I don't agree with a lot of his opposition to Israel. They may have, the United States may be silent for diplomatic reasons, I don't know.
I think that the U.S. and Israel's relationship has been pretty complicated over the past 50 years or so, and I think that it's something they probably want to stay quiet on for as long as possible until they have to take a stance.
I don't know. I guess they just probably don't want to get involved with anything publicly during an election year. That doesn't make sense. But I guess it's Obama's last year, so I guess he has more freedom, but he's a lame duck president, so I don't know.
Again, it would want to stay out of the firing line, so leave that whole side of the world to itself. And obviously, if Israel has its opinion, it's just going to let it do its thing. Plus, it wouldn't want to hurt its mutualism with Israel, because they obviously would be against it. So that's what my opinion on that.
I don't know that the United States is. Again, I think there are efforts afoot to bring people together, and that requires a certain level of diplomacy to bring people together, not to continue to have people separate from each other.
Because we're our allies, basically, you know.
Can our experts provide any clarity about Washington's silence over Israel's clear interference and support for anti-Syrian government militants?
The United States has its own interests here. It's been silent on Israeli aggression against the Palestinians in the past. It's been silent on this occasion as well with Turkish support for ISIS in Syria. It's been silent against Turkish aggression against the Kurds that are fighting ISIS. And again, it's silent on Israeli support for ISIS, which goes to show that the United States is fully committed to this plan of Balkanization of this entire region.
A better question is, why is the US silent on its own meddling in Syria? The US has been bombing long before it has officially been bombing in Syria. The US has, John McCain has met with ISIS fighters in the past and funded ISIS. So I think it goes back to the policy of blaming Saudi Arabia, blaming Turkey, blaming Jordan. All these countries are funding terrorism, but you'd only mention the Muslim countries. Why you not mention Britain, France, Israel, of course, and America itself? So it goes back to this sort of thing. When we come to US now bombing in Syria, apparently to fight ISIS, it's strange that they only get involved once Russia's got involved with its intentions. It looks very clear that they've got involved on a completely different ticket and a completely different reason. This is why Russia and the US can't work together. It's not just to do with a little internal policy, it's that they have completely different intentions within Syria. So it comes down to stopping Russia's thing, getting rid of Assad. It's become embarrassing in front of the world that in 5 years this small country Syria has managed to stand up against all these Western powers and survive. So it is getting to that point now where they're trying to fund terrorism. David Cameron in this country has spoken about funding the moderates, the moderate rebels as he calls them. Moderate rebels, I assume he means Al-Qaeda and the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army who been blowing up schools, mosques, even hospitals themselves. So I don't see that as a moderate opposition just because they're pro-Western or whatnot.
Israel's call for dividing Syria comes as Turkey and Saudi Arabia declare an interest in invading Syria. We asked the public what they would say to Israel, Turkey and Saudi Arabia to try and stop the warmongering.
Stop warmongering? I don't know. There's so much war going on over there. I don't know that they're warmongering. I think they're trying to set up precedents to protect themselves and their people.
They all just need to chill out. I understand that those countries have had tensions over the years, and obviously their problems go back centuries as opposed to us living in a country that's so new. And they're also fighting over lands that they've been at war over for, hundreds and hundreds of years. So they all just need to get to a table and sit down and be willing to give a little bit. There's a lot of bad blood there, but they need to just look forward to the future and not keep harping over, past differences.
I would personally tell them, what's the point of you going into war? Why would you do this? There's no point in controlling even more. Just stay where you are and control what you know. Don't control somebody else's territory.
I would say that putting troops on the ground is always a last measure that you would want to take, and hopefully that region could use a little bit more diplomacy rather than more violence.
Well, warmongering isn't good just because that's a waste of resources, and you should let countries figure out their own thing. It's their own sovereign right to figure out their own issues. And we just can't keep exasperating the conflict that's going on in the Middle East. By sending more troops, you're just going to perpetually continue the war. That's all the conflicts going on in the region.
Just stay out of it. I reckon either help them or at least stay out of it. I wouldn't say keep dividing it, because you're obviously just continuing a war.
When they understand that it's not to their advantage to warmonger, they will stop warmongering, very simply.
What would our experts say to Israel, Turkey and Saudi Arabia in order to try and prevent military action against Syria by this trio of nations?
Well, I would tell the Israelis, the Turks and the Saudis that to stop warmongering, because it's a very dangerous prospect to get involved in a war where you have the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrians already involved. The Kurdish are kept quite heavily armed and they have their own interests to look out for. And the simple fact that the backbone of ISIS has been broken by the Russian offensive and they are sweeping towards victory very quickly indeed, it will not be an easy job to go into Syria, and it could provoke a massive conflagration.
Well, with Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Jordan as well, I would say basically the US will sell you out when it's ready. You should not be looking to the US as your main ally. If you're looking at that, then when they do sell you out and come for you, none of the other Arabs are going to come and protect you. Is no one going to help you. You should try to build up relations with anti-imperialist leaders, or even just the average leader in the Arab world, to try and build these sort of connections, rather than thinking America is always going to help you and is never going to betray you, because the past has shown that they do it over and over and over repeatedly. As far as Israel goes, with the Israeli politicians, Israel was built out of violence. It only understands the language of violence. Its entire existence as an apartheid is an atrocity in itself. So I don't think there's much you can tell the Israeli government. As for the Israeli people, I think they should understand that in the past, Arabs and Jews, or Muslims and Jews, have always worked together. They've always been allies. In the Crusades, in the Spanish Inquisition, in all these times, they fought alongside each other against the genocidal policies of Christian extremists. And so when you're looking at building a European-style state and looking at Europe and America as your allies, rather than thinking, why aren't the Palestinians our allies? Why don't we work together with the Palestinians, build one state as equals, but then we'll have good relations with our neighbours, and we won't be having to go around crying all the time that we're surrounded by enemies. You'll be surrounded by friends and allies. We have to remember, in Islam, we must forgive our opponents once they're no longer oppressing us, once we're ready to unite together. And in Judaism, the Babylonian Talmud teaches that Israel cannot have a state until who they believe the Messiah comes back. So under both religions, religion is the way, is not the thing that's dividing people, it's the thing that can unite Israel and Palestine and create one Palestinian state.
Since March 2011, the conflict in Syria has killed almost 500,000 people and injured 2 million more. Now Israeli officials, already widely accused of supporting Takfiri militants wreaking havoc in Syria, have called for the partition of the Arab country along sectarian lines. Despite this clear threat to regional stability, Washington silently watches on. Saying nothing is dangerously irresponsible and could make a volatile and lethally violent situation even worse.